Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this great discussion on the fact that people really do have the power, and it's our way to preserve our democracy. So, welcome. My name is Angela Munson, and I serve as Director of Outreach in our legislative work with Oklahoma Policy and Together Oklahoma. Together Oklahoma is our outreach advocacy arm, and we have organizers across the state. All four of them right now are in venues where there are viewing parties joining us, those of us who are watching virtually. So we are so happy to have you join us. We have an exciting program today, and we hope that once this hour and a half or so is completed, you'll be energized, charged, revived, renewed, ready to make a difference, not just in your life and the lives of your family members, but the lives of our community, this state, and this country. So I'm not going to keep you long because we have a jam-packed program and people who want to speak to you, and I want you to hear from them. I'll get an opportunity to come back and say thank you and express our appreciation for you being here. But I do want to say this very quickly. Stay with us to the very end of the program today, if you will. As we do in good form and fashion, Together Oklahoma, we would like to provide to some of our viewers a $50 gift certificate, but you have to be present to receive that gift certificate, and you also have to comment. So if you're on Facebook or Twitter or whatever means there might be, Jessica, who is our trusty behind the scenes person, will of course let us know. Make a comment, use your name, and we'll randomly select a couple of people at the very end of the program. So don't go away. Stay with us. Call your friends, call your family members, share the links. It's open access. Anybody can join us. So again, a welcome to our People Have the Power, preserving our democracy through participation event. I just want to say thank you to a couple of organizations who joined us in this effort. The Poor People's Campaign, that music you were listening to was courtesy of the Poor People's Campaign. Thank you, Marianne. I'd also like to say thank you to Rank the Vote in Oklahoma, to ACLU, and to the League of Women Voters. You'll hear from representatives from those organizations in a second, and they've been quite helpful in making sure that this event goes off without a hitch. I'd like to bring up first my friend, Jan Largent. Jan is a leader in the League of Women Voters of Oklahoma, has been for pretty much as long as I've known her. And we've asked Jan to introduce our keynote speaker this evening. So Jan is going to join me. Thank you, Jan, for all that you have done. Welcome. And now I'm going to give you the floor so that you might introduce our keynote speaker for the evening. Jan, I think you're muted. The famous words of our virtual world. There you go. Thank you, Jan. Now
Okay.
you muted.
Thank, thank you, Angela. Yes, I have the privilege of introducing Frederick Isasi, who is the Executive Director of Families USA, one of the nation's leading nonprofit, nonpartisan healthcare advocacy organizations established to ensure the best health and healthcare are equally accessible and affordable to all. Before joining Families USA, Isasi was Division Director of the Nonpartisan National Governors Association and Vice President and founder of the Health Policy Department at the Advisory Board Company. Isasi also previously served as Senior Legislative Counsel on Healthcare for U.S. Senator Jeff Bingaman from New Mexico, which allowed him to apply years of leadership from the healthcare industry. As a national thought leader and subject matter leader, sorry, I lost my place. Expert on social issues and solutions surrounding healthcare affordability, driving value into healthcare, equitable healthcare, and high quality coverage. Isasi has testified often at congressional hearings and is regularly featured in national media outlets, including the New York Times, NBC, Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post. He holds a Juris Doctor from Duke University School of Law, a Master's of Public Health from the University of North Carolina, and a Bachelor of Science from the University of Wisconsin. A Cuban American, Isasi is a proud member of the LGBTQ plus community and resides in Washington, D.C. Frederick, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and the floor is yours.
Hi there. Thank you so much. That was a beautiful introduction. Thank you so much, Jan. And I love that music that we're listening to. It brought me back to all of the marches I've been a part of, and it energized me. So thank you so much. And what a terrific focus for this virtual discussion. People have the power. And I just want to say to all you beautiful Oklahomians, hello. To the folks in the watch parties, hello. It's wonderful to be a part of this discussion. I'm going to keep my remarks pretty brief, say about 10 minutes or so, and I'm really hoping that I'll be able to whet your appetite and help fuel your fire. And to be honest, I was thinking about this as I was getting ready for this discussion. With everything going on right now, the months and months and months of the pandemic, the latest news on Omicron, and it's just easy to feel a little bit exhausted and powerless. So it's really a joy to join you and energize and build our power together. And I'm actually down in North Carolina right now, my family home. So I feel a lot closer to the world of Oklahoma as compared to the crazy little world of Washington, D.C., where I spend most of my time. And I could not begin these remarks without first saying, right off the bat, bravo to Oklahoma on Medicaid expansion. What a terrific job you guys have done. You're a national inspiration. It was a hard slog. The vote was so close, and you did it. And now you are working so hard to make sure that this expansion really rolls out, and millions or thousands and thousands of really vulnerable folks, some of the most vulnerable people in your state, finally have access to the healthcare that they deserve. So thank you for all the thousands of people's lives you've changed in Oklahoma, and the inspiration that you are to your fellow change makers across the nation. So really quickly, for folks who may not be familiar with Families USA, we are one of the leading national nonprofits out there working on healthcare as a social justice issue. Our mission is to ensure, as you heard, that the very best health and healthcare are equally accessible and affordable to all in our nation. We work really intensely in 4 different domains. Health equity is very, very important to us. Healthcare coverage, healthcare value and transformation, and then consumer experience, really lifting up the experiences of families across the country trying to achieve health, to cut through partisanship, cut through the rhetoric, and really drive towards sustainable changes. And the greatest part of this job for me is being able to talk to all of you in these kinds of settings. And also our staff, my staff, we exist to be in service to all of you. So as we talk tonight, hopefully I get you excited, reach out to Families USA. We are here for you. We have lots of resources, and we want to be of service. So I know many of you focus on a very broad agenda around justice, and healthcare may be just new to you or just a small part of your work today. So what I really wanted to focus this discussion on was the important opportunity that health and healthcare present to build power and to really improve the lives of the most vulnerable in our nation. And there's 3 main points I wanted to make. The first is healthcare is a terrific opportunity to move justice forward, both because of how personal and foundational it is, as well as how much it impacts our economic stability and freedom. Second, despite the partisanship of the last decade, we can and are really winning healthcare in red states and blue states, among conservatives and among liberals. In fact, we just helped get some important health insurance reforms passed next door in the Texas legislature. It's possible. Let's discuss. Let's share some lessons learned. And then third, we're on the precipice of the Build Back Better legislation, which we'll talk a little bit about. It's not a done deal, and we need everyone who can hear my voice, lifting their voices, reaching out to the members of Congress to make sure this gets enacted. But it is looking likely, and it's a tremendous opportunity. So I want to talk a little bit about that and about all of the opportunity that's available to working families if we get this right. So let's just start with the opportunity that healthcare represents to build power and move towards justice. And here's the thing, almost all Americans of every political persuasion are with us. We can win this, and here's how. So let me bring up my slides really quickly. Thank you. All right, so the first thing to talk about is that healthcare is foundational. Health is one of the most important ingredients that we have to self-actualize. And this is that sort of famous Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is really a way of understanding human motivation and the way in which we can facilitate every single person in the world being able to self-actualize. And what we know from a lot of research is that physiological health, food, and sleep are the basic rubrics. If you don't have health, you cannot get to the next levels of safety, belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. Health is foundational. That is very deep. That is very powerful. There's a lot of political power in that. And then I want to talk a little bit about the personal nature of healthcare and where the movement is right now. These are not very happy statistics, but beneath them, if you think about it, it's tremendous political power. So right now in this country, 44% of the public, almost half of families in this nation, do not go see a doctor when they need to because of healthcare costs. Almost half. A third report medical care interferes with basic needs like paying for food, housing, heat. 3/4 of the public feel we do not get good value from the US healthcare system, despite spending so much more than other nations, almost $4 trillion. And almost 80% of Americans think the government should help make sure everyone has access to affordable, quality healthcare. That's not Democrats. That's Democrats, Republicans, Independents. A majority across all affiliations believe the government should help make sure everyone has access to affordable, quality healthcare. That comes from Consumer Reports. Think about the political power that we're describing. And then just as a point of reference, I wanted to go back before the pandemic, before we were in a public health emergency. So the 2018 election, 40% of the voters selected healthcare as their most important issue. That was CNN and NBC, 40%. So there's tremendous political power, and a lot of it relates to the fact that the American people do not feel that they can access the healthcare they need to stay healthy. Let's use that political power to drive towards justice. And here I wanted to kind of point out some other ways in which there's real power here. This is a graph that shows the orange lines are premium increases. Those are health insurance premium increases. The blue lines are overall inflation, so how much every year inflation goes up. And then the green line is our paychecks, what we might make while we're working. And what you can see here is that year after year, decade after decade, healthcare premium increases have dramatically escalated faster than either inflation or our paychecks. Back in 2002, we're talking about 4 times faster or 3 times faster than our paychecks. In 2007, we're talking about twice as fast. In 2012, we're talking about something like 50% faster, right? So that's a real crisis. And one of the things we talk about a lot is all the ways in which these healthcare costs that are so out of control and are on people's minds are limiting the choices we can make as families, the homes we can live in, the food that we can buy, maybe the places we can send our kids to school, the times we can decide to retire. These are deep, deep needs. They have tremendous political power, particularly among folks who vote. We can use that to drive towards justice. And then I wanted to mention, as I said earlier, health equity is a very big part of our work at Families. And when it comes to healthcare, this probably is not a big news for you, new news for you guys, but it's a tremendous issue, which is that healthcare is not equitably accessible in our nation, and the health of particularly our communities of color is falling far behind other communities in our nation. So in terms of justice, we can really change the lives of communities of color when we focus on healthcare. Here's one. This is just a graph that shows the rate of uninsurance between 2002 and 2017. We see a big dip right around 2013, 2012, when the Affordable Care Act took off. But what we can see is that the disparities have shrunk, but there's still very big disparities. That blue line is the rate of uninsured, the light blue line is the rate of uninsured of white people, but that darker blue line is Hispanic, the red line is Black, and the black line is Asian. And what you see is basically Hispanic and Black Americans are living with much higher rates of uninsurance compared to their Asian and white counterparts. This is real, and it really affects families' lives. And then I just picked a few statistics to show you, just sort of in terms of achieving health, how far behind we are as a nation when it comes to communities of color. Cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death in the United States. Black adults are at least 50% more likely to die of heart disease or stroke prematurely than their white counterparts. 50%. The infant mortality rate for Black babies is more than double the rate of white babies. Our Black babies are dying twice as often during childbirth. And then 40% of fewer adults of color with mental illness receive treatment compared to their white adults. These are deep, profound inequities. And so when we focus on health, we have political power, and we also have the ability to really drive towards a more equitable society. So let me go back now. Let's take the slides down. Thank you. So we've got the vision. Healthcare has the ability to build and organize political power and is central to creating a more just society. But you live in Oklahoma. I'm in North Carolina right now. Healthcare has become so political. And let's be clear, lots of people are making a lot of money from healthcare. More than $4 trillion a year just in the United States, $4 trillion. This represents a fifth of our economy, and status quo, making sure nothing changes, is very good for them. They want to keep us divided, they want to keep us partisan, and they want to keep their profits going. So we have to tap into this real political power in the real world, and the ingredients are there. Health is fundamental, it's personal, it impacts our economic security. So how do we take that energy and drive towards power and movements that push past partisanship? And the key is value-based messaging. It's built to bring people together. And looking at the fine work at Together for Oklahoma, you guys are already doing this beautifully. It's really powerful. And when it comes to health, we've actually built some top-notch resources to help you hit home runs when it comes to health reform. And I'm just going to show you a couple slides of that. There's an entire guide that's available for free from our website that can really help you think through how you want to build messages around healthcare that can blow past partisanship. We did this with an expert named Drew Weston, who's an expert in psychology and neuroscience. And let's take a look at this really quickly. So if you can put the slides back up. Okay, so here's what's at stake, everything. We have the opportunity to move health reform forward across the nation, despite being in the most polarizing era in the generations, but we won't be successful if we're only talking to ourselves. And I know in Oklahoma, you know this. We certainly do in North Carolina. And this is, here on the schematic, what you see is really message testing. You've probably seen this during elections where they have a dial test, and people they might hear a candidate during a debate, they might hear a message, and they turn a dial to indicate how much they're supporting or in opposition to that message. And traditional partisan messaging, which is most common in our movements, what you see is if it's a Democratic message, people go crazy, the Democrats go crazy, but the Republicans hate it, and vice versa. With values-based messaging, you can really change this. So we worked very hard with Dr. Weston. We tested a bunch of messages, and we came up with them. That's what's in our messaging guide. And what we saw is this is an example of an actual dial test. And this message, one of the key messages in it is most voters and policymakers are happy with their own healthcare, but unhappy with the healthcare in America. And it really gets to the point that every single person in our country should have the same health that our elected officials have access to. And look at what happens, right? It keeps Democrats, Republicans, and persuadables together. They all end up within 10 points and well above 50%. So this is a home run message. This exists in healthcare, and we can use it. And there's some key ideas. One, you have to know the right neural networks you're activating when you build these messages, meaning what are the associations people have with the words you're using? Second, speak to values and emotions. So speak to the deep values that you're holding, not the policies themselves or the values that only resonate for progressives. And then finally, 3, tell coherent, memorable stories. Those stories make all the difference. I was very involved in negotiating the Affordable Care Act. I sat in closed door meetings with the lead Democratic and Republican senators who were negotiating it. And it was the stories that they told each other that got us to yes on Affordable Care Act on many, many issues. So underneath this, what we've said is there are 3 goals to health reform. It must make healthcare more affordable to everyone in our country, including access to meaningful coverage for all families. It has to ensure that health is available to all in our nation, regardless if they are white, black, or brown, if they live in rural America, how they identify, and their immigration status. And it must deliver much greater value, focusing on health and not just procedures that make a lot of money for the healthcare industry. Those are kind of the goals, right? But the sound bites, the narratives, the op-eds that we have in our messaging guide, this is what they look like. Our health should not depend on our wealth. We should have the freedom to choose what's best for our family's health. Whether we're white, black, or brown, everyone who lives in America deserves the same health politicians get, right? That's an example of how we translate those goals into statements that speak to values. And here's just a few more examples. All of us should have the opportunity to live a healthy life and receive high quality healthcare, regardless of our race, ethnicity, or gender. Each of these messages was wildly popular with Democrats, Republicans, and persuadables across the board. I believe in a family doctor for every family. No one in this country should ever have to worry that they can't afford healthcare or have to choose between filling a prescription and paying their rent or mortgage. And I'll do one more. It's time we took an honest, nonpartisan look at what has and hasn't worked in health reform and fix the problems already. It's time to finish the job we started, not tear it down. So those are just some examples. If we can take the slides down now. Thank you. Just a reminder, the entire messaging guide is on the website. It's free and available to everyone. So take a look and reach out if you want to discuss it further. Okay, so the last part of my discussion was just going to be about what's coming our way. Between the American Rescue Plan that was passed in March and Build Back Better, which is close but not across the finish line, there is more than $3.5 trillion in new federal funding available. $3.5 trillion. These are truly historic investments in working families and include everything from support for child and elder care, college loans and grants, and even our largest investment in combating climate change. And the legislation also represents some of the most important health improvements that we'll have passed as a nation. For example, listen to this. The legislation makes 70% of the currently uninsured eligible for coverage, and half of those people could get free or close to no cost coverage. Half. The Build Back legislation also includes a huge investment in maternal health and health for children. It represents the biggest investment in helping families keep elderly and disabled living and thriving at home. But here's the challenge. If it passes, this huge bill is almost certainly going to pass on a completely partisan basis. There's not one Republican vote for it. And uptake is going to be hard. In fact, despite the fact that more than 20 million people could get coverage from these policies, the current estimate is that only about 4 million will, or 1/4. So it's quite likely we could leave 15, 16 million people behind. So it's going to be a hard slog to get the states and communities to see past the partisanship and grab this opportunity. And the only way we can make sure that every single family in Oklahoma can benefit from Build Back Better and other powerful health reforms, we've got to get organized. We've got to build the narratives and the messages that pulverize partisanship and get policy experts, state policymakers engaged. And then we build a movement behind us. That's how we win. We've done it over and over again. And the opportunities are just going to be growing. You've got the power. The opportunity in health are so powerful. And remember, Families USA and a whole army of folks like us are here to support you and be in service to you. So I want to thank Jan again and Angela and the whole team for inviting me to be a part of this discussion tonight. And please visit our website, familiesusa.org. That's familiesusa.org. You can get a copy of the messaging guide. There's a tremendous amount of information about really important health reforms that you guys could decide to pursue. And you can get involved in making sure that Build Back Better passes and that Oklahoma takes full advantage of it. So thank you so much. It's been a complete pleasure to be part of this conversation.
Thank you, Frederick. I just want to personally say thank you. I've known Frederick for some years now, and he was so willing to come and share his thoughts about healthcare and healthcare reform, really, though, as an example of how people working collectively together can truly make a difference in some fundamental needs that people have. Healthcare is a great example because it does transcend party politics, it transcends all kinds of things, geographical areas. We all need to be healthy, right? We all need to stay healthy. We all need access to those basic human and civil rights that fundamentally make this country work. Those things that are fundamental to making sure we keep and preserve and ensure that everyone has those rights that are guaranteed us through our Constitution. That's what a democracy is about. That's what a representative democracy is about. And it doesn't work, however, unless people engage. And we've proven that. We've proven the effectiveness through healthcare. Thanks, Frederick. You told us how, you showed us how it can work. And now we have some panelists that can really broaden this discussion to some other fundamental areas of democracy. I said to some friends today, this is a real scary time for all of us. I mean, there are things happening in our country right now that make many of us who are older or as old as I am really wonder if we will ever get over the hump and create the kind of community, the kind of society, the kind of government that truly ensures that every single person in this country is treated equally, that every single person in this country has access to the things that they need, and that we do the things that we say we as a country will do. And in fact, as we think about redistricting, as we think about the partisanship that exists, as we think about voting rights that are being taken away from us, healthcare rights, basic rights to control our own bodies, when we think about all the things that are occurring in our society, we should get nervous. And it should, I hope, inspire us not to be apathetic and say, oh, it doesn't matter, I can't change it, the problems are too large, but to really say, what can I do to make a difference? Activism is important. So we have 4 panelists that we're going to move right into right now. Jessica, if we can just have them all join me on screen. And have them come up and speak to us about how they see things occurring in our country, in Oklahoma, in their communities right now, as it relates to preserving our democracy, as it relates to ensuring that people do and can and will exercise the power that only rests with the people who live in this country. So I'm excited to introduce them. I'm going to, again, introduce each of you and ask that you speak just a few minutes about what you think. And then we're going to come back and have a discussion among all of us. So I'm going to introduce the one with the longest bio first. I think he knows who that is. It's Reverend Dr. Mark W.A. Davies. Mark is the Wimberly Professor of Social and Ecological Ethics, Director of the World House Institute for Social and Ecological Responsibility. Boy, Mark, that's a long description. He also is the Executive Director at Leadership of the Leadership Education and Development Hub, North United States, for the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry at Oklahoma City University. Say all of that to say that he is a critical part of Oklahoma City University in their department, where he's worked as a teacher and as administrator for 25 years. He's an ordained minister. He's extraordinarily active in the United Methodist Church still. And he's also very, very active in community and social issues. Specifically, he is working with the Human Community Network. And it's through that network that Mark has been engaged in something called Rank the Vote, ranked choice voting. And Mark, we're very happy to have you here with us as a leader in the Oklahoma Rank the Vote effort. And I don't know where he disappeared to off the screen. He's having some issues. So he'll come back with us and speak a few minutes about where he is, what he's engaged in. So I'll move from Mark to Marianne. Yes, Marianne Smith. Marianne Smith moved to Lawton, Oklahoma from the Central Coast of California in August of 2018. So she's new to our state. She's a daughter, a mom of five, and five of many, and six grandchildren, five children, six grandchildren. And five of my six grandchildren are young women. Wow, lots of girls in that household, and makes her cause to ensure equity and protecting the rights of people, all people, even more fundamentally important. So Marianne says, rather than seeing an improvement of rights and opportunities for her children, she is witnessing a decline right about now. As a biracial female, Marianne, her whole life has been litigated. She was school age when Loving versus Virginia was passed, the same for the Civil Rights Act and the ERA. And she doesn't want her grandchildren to continue to fight for the same rights that she's been experiencing and fighting for. Her parents and her grandparents have fought for so long. She's extraordinarily active in the Poor People's Campaign here in Oklahoma, serving as one of the tri-chairs, the Poor People's Campaign. She'll tell us a little more about it and what they do and why it's important. But I want to say this, that Marianne has said in her statement, that it's important to lift from the bottom, because when we do so, everyone rises. Thank you, Marianne, for being with us. You're right, our voices do matter. Why don't you take a few minutes and tell us where you are in this social change movement we see?
Let me tell you a little bit about and thank you so much for having me. What an honor to be amongst all these panelists. Let me tell you a little bit about the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. We are a national campaign that addresses the interlocking injustices of systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, and denial of health care, mental disability, and physical, militarism and war, and the war economy, and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism. Drawing on the history of moral fusion, the Poor People's Campaign is made up of over 40 state campaigns, coordinating committees, and over 200 partnering organizations, and thousands of religious leaders of all denominations, bringing together the nation's 140 million poor and low-income people across race, ability, religion, gender, social orientation, region, and issue. Alongside the faith leaders, organized labor advocates, activists, and other people of conscience, the Poor People's Campaign seeks to address these injustices and revive the heart and soul of our democracy, with an agenda rooted in the needs and priorities of the 140 million poor and low wealth, as well as our deepest constitutional and moral values. We participate in direct action. We also non-violent. We will sing. We'll march, and there's power in numbers. So we work to include any and all citizens of the United States for human rights, moral rights. It's not a Democrat, Republican, left, right. It's moral or not. And we're working on the side of moral. So again, thanks for having me, and I look forward to this discussion.
Organizations are in front and center in this whole campaign, this whole effort, this whole movement to ensure that people are protected, that people's rights are protected. And Mark has gone off screen. He's really having some technical difficulties. So we'll come back to him. There he is. He's back with us now. Mark, I'm going to get you while I can. Mark is one of those individuals quite involved and engaged in an effort that really demonstrates a fundamental right, our right to vote. With Rank the Vote effort. Mark, I'm going to give you the floor. We got a little clicking in the background, but let's see if we can hear you and get you in to talk to us about how you feel, what you see this whole movement to be.
Thank you very much, Angela. I hope you're able to hear me okay. I'm with Rank the Vote Oklahoma. I'm the vice president of Rank the Vote Oklahoma, and we are Oklahoma citizens working to educate our neighbors and our communities on the advantages of ranked choice voting, also known as instant runoff voting. And with IRV, each voter ranks the candidates in order of their choice. So your favorite candidate, you would rank number 1, your second favorite number 2, and so on. And when you do a single winner instant runoff voting situation, a candidate has to have more than 50% of the votes in order to win. So if a candidate gets more than half of the electorate's first choice votes after one round, they win the election. But if not, the candidate with the fewest number of votes is eliminated, and any voter who picked the eliminated candidate as their first choice will have their vote count for their second choice. And then the process continues until a candidate wins with more than half the votes. So what is this all about, and why is it important for Oklahoma? Oklahoma, like most places in the United States, uses plurality voting, also known as first past the post, to determine our general election winners. And it's a simple system. You vote for just one candidate, and whoever gets the most votes wins, even if they don't have a majority. So it's simple, but that doesn't mean it's good. It's actually not a very good system. In fact, most people who study voting systems tend to agree that plurality voting is one of the very worst ways to run an election. And it's led to a number of problems and, what I say, perverse outcomes in states like Maine and Florida and here in Oklahoma more than once. And also in many other places time and time again. And here's why it's such a problem. It leads to a number of issues. One is voter dilemmas, insincere voting. Voters feel forced to adopt calculated strategies based on who they think other voters might like, instead of just voting for their honest favorite. It also brings about limited voter choices by discouraging strong independents and third-party candidates, because they often are cast as spoilers in a plurality system. It can also lead to negative campaigns when you have plurality voting, because the best way to win is to tear down the other candidate. And also, elected officials with low voter support end up winning in plurality voting oftentimes, when candidates who appeal to less than a majority end up winning because other similar, more popular candidates end up dividing voters between them. Also, it exacerbates the problem of gerrymandering when you have plurality voting, which is made more effective and enticing by a large number of wasted votes in a plurality system. So ranked choice instant runoff voting helps address many of these problems. It also allows people to vote their first choice every time without harming their second choice or helping their least favorite choice. And we believe at Rank the Vote Oklahoma, this will enhance voter participation, also enhance voter enthusiasm over the long term, and lead to more diverse political voices and representation. And anyone interested is welcome to go to rankthevote.org, rankthevoteok.org, and you can sign up there to be a volunteer. Thanks.
Thanks so very much, Mark. You know, voting is critical in a representative democracy. If people don't vote, if people don't participate, people used to say to me, oh, they're going to do what they want to do anyway. Well, that's a fact if you don't vote and you don't participate in the process. There's an organization, the League of Women Voters, who's been working for a lot of years, a long time, for as longer than I am maybe old, ensuring that people have access to the ballot, which is fundamental to our democracy and to preserving our democracy. So I'd like to introduce Stephanie Henson. She's the Vice President of the League of Women Voters of Oklahoma. And Stephanie serves on the board of the League of Women Voters of Oklahoma County. She actually taught school in the US and in Canada, and she's enjoyed and volunteering in her community, has 2 children that she's raised, and pursuing a PhD at OSU in Human Development and Family Science. I know that Stephanie's extraordinarily involved in ensuring that our democracy is preserved and that people's voices are heard. So Stephanie, tell us what's on your mind for a few minutes this evening.
Angela, thank you so much for all that you've done to bring us together, and your organization bringing all of these amazing voices together. I feel like that the League of Women Voters was born out of that. People, women in particular, wanting to raise their voices. The League was, it's as old as the 19th Amendment. In 1920, the 19th Amendment was passed, which gave women the suffrage, the right to vote. And it really grew out of many movements sometime before that. The history was that a lot of women and men who were wanting to participate in their community, whether it was healthcare and all kinds, whatever the issues, and overwhelmingly the issues were abolition, anti-slavery, the temperance movement, which for women was a lot about speaking out against domestic violence. All of these movements were things in which women wanted to raise their voice, and at some point they realized that their voices were diminished and not nearly as powerful without the right to vote. And so the suffrage movement was born out of the movements just that we all feel we want to be a part of when we live and we love in our communities, and we want to see our communities be the best that they can be, and we want to see one another thrive. We want to be able to raise our voice, and so to have the vote is so important. So that's kind of the history, a little bit of the history of the League. And I got involved though in 2018. Interestingly, I had gone to Oklahoma City University, where Mark Davies is also, he is affiliated with a group called the Coalition of the Underheard. And it was the coolest group of people who had these amazing, causes that they wanted to be a part of. And it's just bringing together all of these different groups of people. And that included the folks with the League of Women Voters, who are now some of my dearest friends. I remember I was sitting next to Bill Clifford on one side of me, and he had, and he's a member of our League of Women Voters chapter, has been a member of our league. And he was one of the individuals who back in the 1950s, before North Carolina was at Katz drugstore, and trying to ensure that Oklahoma City restaurants would allow Black individuals to sit at the lunch counters. And so, just these heroes. I'm in the League of Women Voters with these amazing, amazing heroes. And I raise my voice with these men and these women in the League of Women Voters who want to make our world a better place. And so my elevator speech for the League of Women Voters is that it's a piece of cake coming together and just being together as League members and raising our voices. And CAKE is the acronym that stands for coalition. We work in coalition with these amazing groups. The A of CAKE is for advocacy. And currently one of our big advocacy platforms and issues is criminal justice reform. And then K stands for knowledge, because we do provide a lot of education, when it comes to, for sure, voting rights and so knowledge and education. And I'd said, coalition, advocacy, knowledge and education. And then I said, I kind of wanted to add empowerment as well, because I felt so empowered in working with the League and in working with all of these folks, like the folks here tonight, who just inspire me. So thank you all for empowering me to raise my voice with you. And thank you all.
Hey, Thank you very much, Stephanie. Stephanie mentioned the league starting because of the focus on voting and the right to vote, but then she expanded it and talked about the league's work in a whole lot of areas. So we understand that voting is fundamental to our democracy, but there are so many other issues that people in this country are facing. Many of them would not be issues if people voted, but many of them, of course, would not be issues if people just organized and worked hard. There's an organization that we all know well that continues to work really hard on a variety of issues that fundamentally protect the rights of citizens, the ACLU. And we are so happy to have a young woman that I've known for a long, long time, makes me feel old, Tamya Cox-Toure, Tamya Cox-Toure, forgive me, who currently serves as the executive director of the ACLU Oklahoma. Prior to being executive director, she served as the legislative counsel for our ACLU Oklahoma. She's a graduate of Oklahoma State University and a graduate of Oklahoma City Law School. Before joining the ACLU, she worked as executive director, I hope I got that right, at Planned Parenthood right here in Oklahoma City, and has really committed her life to civil rights and promoting the rights of others and speaking directly to people who think they have the power to ensure that they understand what regular people have to deal with and go through every day. In fact, she'll be in Washington, D.C. She is in Washington and will be speaking in front of the Supreme Court tomorrow. So we're very, very proud of her. And I'd like to bring her on, Tamya Cox-Toure.
Hi, Angela. Thank you so much for having me. I'm such in awe to be on this amazing panel with activists and advocates across the state. One of my favorite quotes is, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And I think that's what's so amazing about Oklahoma, our coalition building, our ability to work together on so many different issues with so many people coming together in one voice, standing up for people, for folks, just to say, you know, we demand humanity and we deserve to have our voices heard. And that's what's so amazing and beautiful about the work of all of our organizations that you see here. So thank you again. And thank you for the listeners and those that are watching. As Angela said, I'm the executive director of the ACLU of Oklahoma. I've been with the affiliate for in this position for over a year now. And I have been so fortunate to lead this amazing team of people working to promote and protect civil liberties in Oklahoma. The ACLU of Oklahoma is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization with one simple mission: to protect and promote civil liberties. And no surprise, in Oklahoma, that can be difficult. But what we do know is that just because it's difficult doesn't mean we don't do it. And that's what all of our organizations have in common. We do the hard work because that's what's important and that's what matters. And I think you see it in the passion of what the issues that we talk about. We talk about voting, right? Voting is one of the most fundamental rights that we have. But we know that access to voting is not, equitable across the board. There's so many barriers that Oklahoma legislature has created to vote. And we in one voice have to come together and say, protect our vote. Enough is enough. But one of the things I also want to talk about is that we go further than just voting. Like, we want to protect all civil liberties that we can. So that ranges from ensuring that our LGBTQ2+ spirit and plus brothers and sisters, have a voice as well, that we are protecting the First Amendment, that we are protecting the rights of all Oklahomans to have access to a safe and legal abortion. And as Angela said, I'm here in DC, that I will be speaking, not in front of literally in front of the Supreme Court, but not in front of the justices. Activists across the country will be speaking about why we need to ensure that Roe v. Wade is not overturned tomorrow morning, at the same time that the attorneys and the experts are inside the court, talking to the Supreme Court about why they should not overturn. And that's where the power is. I love the title of this panel, right? Because the power really lies with the people, and sometimes that's forgotten. And a lot of the times it's designed that way, right? Like we have systems designed to keep the voices of the people silent. And that is the work that we have to do and continue to do to ensure that we make sure, that those voices are heard. By trade, I'm your attorney that's never been in the courtroom, right? Like we used to have this joke that if we wanted a case to settle, put my name on there and the case would settle before it would go to trial. But one of the things by trade is I'm a registered lobbyist. So I've been doing policy work for the last 15 years. So I know Angela as Senator Munson, so it's really hard to say Angela, right? I know as Senator Munson, right? And one of the things that I learned very quickly on, and that I say often, so if anyone has had an opportunity to hear me speak, is that when policy is created without people considered, that's where oppression lives. And that's what we need to fight when we're talking about all these policy systems and changes that are happening and what's happening specifically under the dome, on 23rd Street in Oklahoma City. And also right down the street from where I'm at right now at Capitol Hill, we have to make sure that the voices of the people are centered in every single policy that is passed. And a lot of the times, if we're honest, in Oklahoma, that's just not happening. So it's important for us to come together, to stand together in one voice, to say as loudly as we can that we're going to center the people in these policy decisions and make sure that their voices are heard. And when they're not heard, we're going to speak up loudly, whether that's for a rally, whether that's writing your senator, whether that's just giving them an email or tweeting or on social media. Our voices are so important that they have to be heard. And that's what I hope that at the end of this panel and webinar, that people will find just different ways and tactics to ensure that their voices are being amplified as much as they can be. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what everyone else has to say.
Hey, thanks, Tamya. That was a great segue into this discussion that we're getting ready to have. And you're absolutely right. People's voices have to be heard. People can't be silenced, and people cannot refuse to speak. Both go hand in hand. So now is an opportunity for us to just talk about why this is important. And today, right this moment, right this very day, why it is extraordinarily important for people to recognize that they do have the power to make the difference. And if the first person I advocate self, it has to advocate, because if you yourself, no one else will. So I hope people who are watching will stay with us. Remember, we have these 2 gift certificates to give out later. You got to be present to win, but I hope they'll be energized and understand that, sometimes it takes only 2 or 3 people to start a revolution. So let's just talk for a minute about our democracy, that people say, oh, it's being threatened. Our right to vote is being taken away from us. We see it in Congress when 1 or 2 members have the ability just to stop any action from happening. We talk about gerrymandered congressional districts here in Oklahoma. We talk about people losing their voting access, all these kinds of things that seem to take away and negate what we have worked so hard for almost centuries. So there is I think, in my opinion, a true threat to democracy. But I want each of you to tell me, in your opinion, do you agree? And if so, what do you believe is the greatest threat to our democracy right now? And if it exists, what's the foundation? What's the basis? What's the genesis of that threat that you've identified? Tamya, you were talking to Maya. I don't know why I keep saying that. Tamya, please, forgive me. Let's start with you.
Right. So I'll take it in this way. I don't think that the threat to democracy is greater than it's ever been. I think it's just more visual and people are more aware, right? I think we've seen more emboldened politicians than we've seen in a while. But I think the underlying oppressions of the systems, whether that's white supremacy, patriarchal systems, those have always been in play. I think what's happening is not only are people more aware, and what I love most about it is the young folks more aware. And I say this all the time, is that it's the younger generations that make the changes that we have and that we see that get us to a better place. And that is what I'm seeing, is when the young folks start standing up and saying enough is enough. That is what I think is different. So the threat to democracy, I think, has always been there. When we're talking about people of color, when we're talking about women, when we're talking about our gay and lesbian, brothers and sisters, and and everyone on the spectrum, like, those threats have always been there. I think what's different now is that people are thinking about different tactics on ways that we can ensure ultimately what we're fighting for. For me, it's liberation, and that is what I think people are thinking differently about. Real quickly, for the longest, we talked about justice and equality. And I think it's time for us to take that further, that justice is the baseline and equality is the baseline, but liberation has to be that goal. And I think that's a different mindset, or at least different vocabulary, that we've seen in the last decade. The reason why I think we have a true threat to democracy sometimes it's about when you have administrations, and a presidential the last presidential administration that was very loud and very open and boisterous about where they landed, that emboldened folks, and that gave people the idea that they could be more vocal, even if that voice was hateful, like they could be it and be fine. And then we have a justice system that we know is designed to fail people of color, but we're being able to expose that more. And I think that's why it maybe feels like the threat is immediate, when a lot of us feel like that threat's been underlying for so long. We're just now able to expose it in a different way.
Tamya, Stephanie, the League has been involved in trying to preserve our democracy for a long time. What do you think? You think that it's always been there, that it's stronger or greater now, or it's just more exposed, as Tamya said?
I appreciate that, Tamya, that you had that optimistic slant. And one of the things I love, again, in working in coalition with folks, because especially very recent, because I find myself right now feeling pessimistic, on any given day, maybe I love seeing it through your eyes and hearing you say it that way. But, when we failed to pass what had been the 2019 For the People Act, which more recently became the Freedom to Vote Act, when that failed to pass, I think I have felt pretty heartbroken by that. I think that the difficulties in working in a bipartisan way, to me, that I think that when you ask the question, Angela, about the greatest threat to democracy, I think zero-sum game politics in which there's winners and losers, to me, feels like a threat to the core of democracy, which is being able to compromise and work with your neighbor. And so I'm so grateful, Tamya, to you, because I need to believe and I need to have that hope. I love that you mentioned the young people, because I 100% feel that when I'm talking to a lot of young people. There's so many passionate young people that I've had the opportunity to work with the League of Women Voters. Mark, by the way, your sweet daughter, Ray Davies got us on Instagram with the League of Women Voters. We were all sitting around going, we probably need to get a little more social media savvy. And so we were able to turn to a wonderful young friend who's now at Oklahoma City University. And so I am hopeful 100% with the young people, but I have days for sure when I feel like that zero-sum game thinking. So for me, it's about coming and finding ways. I love the way that Frederick said that when he was talking about finding those ways of the value-based ways of coming back together and around the chowder kettle, like Walt Whitman said. Poet of democracy is Walt Whitman. And so I think finding those ways to come back together. So thank you guys for that.
Mark, Stephanie mentioned just then that there seemed to be this polarization and we're not together and zero-sum game. And when we think about ranked choice voting, it's a way to maybe alleviate some of that. In your opinion and your experience and things that you've seen, is there a fundamental threat to our democracy, in your opinion? What might that be? What might be the genesis? And does the electorate process have anything to do with that?
I do think that the biggest threat is related to one of the things that Ranked the Vote Oklahoma and ranked choice voting is attempting to deal with. I think the attempts to create a system or systems in which a minority of the country is able to hold a majority of the political power through voting suppression, gerrymandering, co-opting institutions that are meant to protect the vote. Put simply, it's a rising threat of autocracy. It's a willingness to thwart fair democratic processes in order to come to power, maintain power, and expand power. It's very Machiavellian in many ways. The genesis of the threat, I think, is complex. It's multifaceted, but I would argue that it's rooted mainly in two things. One is the maintenance of the power of corporations in our economic and political life. And two, their willingness to use racial tensions, white supremacy, and the fear of the loss of control among a large segment of white Americans, for the most part Christians, to propagandize these mainly white Americans to accept increasingly autocratic methods to maintain power. So I think what many people are waking up to, and there's been a lot of writing about it recently, is that we are now experiencing a battle between autocracy and democracy. And it's that willingness to move towards autocracy to maintain and expand power that I think is the greatest threat that our democracy is facing today.
What a lot of people are seeing and talking about, the ability of the minority to control, to create policies that keep the power centered in a small sector of our society, one that's not truly representative necessarily of most people. And the Poor People's Campaign, I know, came about to give voice, to give power to a large segment of people in this country who had been silenced, who systematically have been silenced. So, in your opinion, in your work with the Poor People's Campaign, do you see that this threat to our democracy being fundamentally housed in this minority of people who want to keep and control power? So what's your thought? And I want you to continue that discussion, Marianne, on if that is the case, if there is a threat, in your opinion, and what that threat might be, then what do you think that we could do, we as a people, significantly? What can we do to make sure that we can preserve our democracy?
I do see the threat, and I agree with all my fellow panelists there. And can build on some of what they've said, taking a different angle. The poor and low wealth, and we just did the national group, the Repairers of the Breach just did a group. When I first asked the question, I'll go back, when I first pondered the question of, what do I believe the greatest threat was, my first response automatic was apathy, but that's not it. I don't believe it is. I think maybe despondency is a better word. And because they've lost courage, they've lost hope, they've lost there are so many Americans and Oklahomans in particular that have just decided, well, you know, it's not going to make a difference anyway, so why do I even bother? And that's why, building on what Stephanie said, she had a little acronym, and we do more. And a lot of ours are the same. We mobilize, organize, register voters, educate, empower, and embolden. So that E can go. But the educate is extremely important. And I know that earlier there was a discussion about Oklahoma passing the Medicaid expansion. In working on that and in just gathering signatures to get it on the ballot, I was able to engage with so many people. And the study that we've done is that 38% of Oklahomans are poor or low wealth. 38%. And it goes across, that's a total of 1.4 million residents of the state of Oklahoma. And that includes 51% of the children, 44% of women, 63% of the Black people, 63% of Latinx, 35% of the white people. So it's not, it's actually, if we can educate and register and get those people out to vote, but talk to them and make them know. And that's what we do. Like, just invite anybody you know to, hey, you know what, this is going on. Let's go up to the state capitol and let them know what we think. Let's go to Washington, D.C. and let them know what we need. Our legislators, our government are not listening to us, and they haven't for so long that a lot of the poor and low wealth think that a tidbit is good, but my vote doesn't really matter. And we have got to mobilize every activist group in the state of Oklahoma, and then organize them all together, work together in partnership, which is, I'm so appreciative for all of you because we do that. And then register voters, and then educate the voters. And the way to empower or embolden them is to not me go out and speak, although I am not a wealthy person. I could be, I'm on disability, so I'm disabled. I could qualify and do on a whole bunch of levels, but embolden them to work together, use their voices and their votes, and actually demand their power back, because really the power is in the people. And that's what and we've got to remind them that if we work together, that's where the power is.
You're absolutely right. Power is, it rests with the people. But you know what? There's an old saying that said, if you have power and don't use that power, you are a powerless people. There's another saying that says, you may not have power, but the perception that you do makes you powerful. Tamya, I know ACLU has worked a whole lot of these issues, and typically not, well, I was going to say not involved in voting, but you are ensuring that people have rightful access to the ballot. Do you think that the utilization of the vote is the most significant way that we can preserve our democracy? Or are there other quite useful, very useful tactics or strategies that can be employed to ensure that people feel that they have, not just feel that they have power, but truly exercise the power that they have?
No, I think that's a great question. I think at the very, very fundamental, right, that it is about voting and ensuring that access to voting remains the same. But I also want us to think further and challenge ourselves as to why people become apathetic, right? Mm-hmm. And feel like they don't have a voice, or, or come to the conclusion that what's the point? And a lot of the time is because people want to vote for something. People want to be passionate about whether vote, because people's votes are so important to themselves that they want to make sure that they are giving it to someone or something, whether it's an issue or a person that they feel passionate and connected to. And sometimes that connection is lost with legislators and politicians. And sometimes it becomes because they are politicians, and politicians in the negative sense, and not decision makers, and not activists, and not, everything that inspires people. And I think sometimes what's lost in our whole electoral world is people that inspire other people. And whether that's good or bad, I don't think everyone has to come out and have a big personality in order to run, and be successful in a campaign and be elected. But I also think they need to inspire someone and see that they're willing to put in the work to get people inspired to get out to vote. So I think part of the tactics is just getting out to vote. I think it is upon us, and part of the tactics is holding people accountable. And that could be your best friend who is running for election, or who is, your senator or member. But when they vote wrong, or don't stand up to vote, or refuse to debate against, in my case, like in an abortion bill, they should be held accountable for their lack of action or for their action. And people should feel that they have the right to hold their elected officials accountable. I think that's another tactic. But I think the last tactic really is it is upon those that have the power. And when I mean those with the power, I'm thinking about like organizations like my own with resources, that we're not talking to just the base, that we're talking to low propensity voters. People, so it's not just enough to register people to vote. We have to encourage them and inspire them and embolden them and empower them to get out to vote, right? To exercise that right to vote. And a lot of the times, community of color specifically feel like they are only thought about around election cycles, that they are only talked to around election cycles. And that, is upon us as people working in like the electoral world to ensure that those voices are being heard at every level. And we bring people in, not just at the ballot box, we bring them into the decisions that are happening, at the Capitol. We bring them into when the policy is being made. And if we have those continued touches with them, then they continue to, find their voice and find their power. And that is what I think our goal and overall reach has to be. So I think those are the tactics to get to essentially, to just show people where their power lies. But I think that also if we can, succeed in those tactics, I think that encourages people to be part of the democratic and democracy, that process.
Mark, both Tamya and Marianne and Stephanie have said lots of things about the power of the vote and being apathetic, and how people feel about what's going on around them. And you're a reverend on this panel, and you're a social activist. From your perspective, what is, I want to ask this question in two ways, because I want to talk a little more about how you view issues or reasons why people don't engage. But I also want you to talk from, even, I hate to say it, a moral, ethical perspective. What is that we really can do or should be doing so that people are just listening? I'm looking at some of the names, and I know some of these people, and they vote, but they don't engage. Or maybe even they don't vote often. They'll vote in a presidential race. What is it that we're missing, those of us on this panel and those of us who do this work? What is it that we can do and that would inspire, as Tamya said, people, embolden people to be involved in this whole process of social change?
Well, I think collectively, the thing we have to do is we have to work on the systems that are creating sometimes the despondency or the apathy or the hesitancy in relation to totally engaging with the political system. So I would say individually, it's very clear the most significant thing I think we can do is vote. Vote like the future of our democracy depends on it, because it does. But collectively, we have to pass voting rights legislation. One of the worst Supreme Court decisions of my lifetime. And there's been a lot of bad ones, but one of the worst was when they gutted the Voting Rights Act and they took away the pre-clearance provision in the Voting Rights Act. We have to have new voting rights legislation, because if we don't, then people, I think, have a tendency to think, well, the system's not working for me, the system's against me. Why should I even try? And if my elected officials that I did go out and vote for aren't going to really go to the end of the world to get this to happen, and they're just kind of sitting back and saying, well, we got this filibuster, we can't do anything about it, there's nothing we can do, that really, I think, fosters even more apathy. So I think it's the moral responsibility of every person in Congress to pass voting rights legislation. And then it's all of our responsibility to work for election reforms that will increase voter participation, but not just increase voter participation, but also work for equitable representation of all of our citizens. And obviously, I think ranked choice voting, instant runoff voting is one of those election reforms that moves us in that direction, but there are quite a few others. But the first priority right now, it should have been done already, is new voting rights legislation. If that's not passed before the next election, I think we could be in some serious trouble in terms of the impact on voter turnout.
You know, when we impact voter turnout, you know, we impact the results of elections. And I've always said elections have consequences, clearly. Stephanie, the League has been working to make sure that everybody has equitable, fair, just access to the ballot. You know, I'm kind of like you, and Tamya, I'm so glad to hear your upbeat conversation too, because I just think, oh no, I wonder what kind of world my grandbabies are going to live in if we don't do something. So I'm not going to end on this question on this point, but I do want people to understand that there is a lot at stake. Stephanie, in your opinion, and you've been involved for a while, you see things, you know the history of the League. If we're not able to pass a Voting Rights Act, if we're not able to inspire and motivate and embolden people to engage, what really is at stake? What are some of the consequences, in your opinion, that of not acting, of not taking action, of not voting? You know, what do we risk?
So, you know, and I am hoping we're not ending, especially on this one, but I read a book by Jared Diamond called Upheaval. And it's, if you start looking at other countries in which democracies that they thought were very strong did fall, and the devastation when that happens in other countries. So I think sometimes it's really helpful to look even sort of outside of our own United States history, because all of us here have only ever known really a democratic, you know, but so if we look at what's happened in other countries, and that's devastating. Jared Diamond's Upheaval, and I do love that his book does give some suggestions for what we can do, and overwhelmingly it's compromise, you know, is what Jared Diamond says, because and kind of what Mark was saying, you know, the governments that come up and take over after a democracy falls can be devastating, you know, especially if you already have seeds in that country of dehumanizing behavior one to another, you know, and there's polarization and there's a lot of hate. So that's why, if I were going to end on a happy note, this idea that Frederick said about this value-based messaging, you know, I feel very strong about that, the value-based messaging and coming together, because it's devastating what happens. It can be very devastating if a democracy were to fall.
Anybody want to add anything? Any other comments on that? And then we're going to make this a positive ending, I promise.
Well, see, I think that is what we do. And I'm sorry. We mobilize. We watched it happen a couple of weeks ago when we were against the death penalty for Julius Jones. I saw Oklahomans come together, use their voices every single night. And so I am uplifted knowing that it's possible for people that aren't usually activists or people that don't know they're activists yet, come together, Oklahomans, humans across the board of every race, gender, everything, come together, hold our elected officials accountable. We hit the streets. That's what we do. And the more of us that do it, the more apt they're going to say, hey, people are paying attention. So that's building on the positive, because we've just seen it happen within the last month. And so it's doable. And I'm working on that theory.
People do have the power. Tamya, your thoughts?
Yeah. So, I mean, are we trying to be, are we just uplifting? Like,
well, just what we're ending. So,
okay.
Let's uplift her, but let's be honest. I think it's important for us to be very honest about how you see the world.
Mm-hmm.
And, if it's going to be chaos, let's recognize that, but let's also talk about how we can avoid that as well.
No, so I think for me, how I deal with it, I love the fact that, because my staff, I think, would think differently, that I was like the uplifting and the optimist, right? Like for 15 years, I have been a lobbyist at the Capitol in Oklahoma City. I have been one of the few Black women lobbyists talking about social justice. Prior to last year, I was, for the 9 years, the abortion lobbyist, right? Like, so I know what it feels like to be defeated and disappointed and everything under the book and jaded about the system. But what gives me hope, and what will continue to give me hope, and which I truly believe in, is that that the politics and that what I'm trying to say, that it happens around the kitchen tables and the work happens at the local levels. So while I had, for the last couple years, right, given up what's happening at the federal level, I had given up what's happening at the state level. But I know that if we can go into the more local areas, that's where democracy can happen. So it's our school boards and our city councils and our county commissioners. And when we lift those folks up, then we lift our state up. And I think that's what gives me hope. And I think that is really real, is that sometimes we focus so much on, everything that's happening on a broader spectrum that we forget where some of the local power lives. And that's where democracy should and always will be, exist. And if we remember that and we, lean into that, I think we'll be just fine. I think I have to be optimistic, right? Like, it is so easy to be jaded with so many of the things that happen, on 23rd Street. But as Marianne said, I completely turned around when I saw people motivate and activate around the death penalty and around, Julius Jones. And I say that to say that the ACLU, I was so inspired that we called for a moratorium on the death penalty, right? We recognize that it is a long shot that we are going to have our governor come out and say, yes, let's end the death penalty. But we have activated and had more with doing patch through calls, meaning like we will call someone and then we can connect the governor's to the governor's desk, right? And we've had more people like involved in that than we've had in a lot of our work. So people are ready and wanting something to connect to. And I think at the end of the day, what I will always know happens is that, as our panel says, that the people have the power. And when the people realize that, from the young to the old, I think that is when, our democracy will flourish. And I know it happens because it's all, it happens in cycles, right? What I was doing 10, 15 years ago and getting people involved, and while it still feels the same, there were a lot of times where we felt bad and nothing changed was going to happen. And then we saw the upswing of it. And, I'm ready to ride that wave up with so many of the great partners here to get us to that point of liberation that we should never stop fighting for, and definitely never will, you know. So I look forward to getting to work. That's all that matters. You know, that's what it is for me. Let's get to work. So.
Let's get to work. Tamya said she's gonna ride that wave. Some of us who are beyond the 65 plus, we've been riding that wave a long time here. Absolutely right. Mark, I'm going to give you the last word. Guys who are listening and viewing and watching, and thank you those who are, I've just got notices from my regional organizers that people are at our viewing parties, so there are more people watching and engaged. If you're having trouble commenting, try to go to our Facebook page and get a comment, because we're going to give these 2 gift cards out here in just a second. Jessica, get ready, pull some names for us, give folk a few minutes. Mark, are you hopeful, Mark? Are you hopeful that things will get better? Jessica, we can't hear him.
There we go. I often think of Martin Luther King Jr. in this regard, because he asked that question, where do we go from here, chaos or community? And that could be the question for our time. I do think we can go in both ways.
We lost Mark. Mark's having some serious problems. We're going to bring him back. I know he's going to sign back in so he can hear the rest of that chaos, our community, and go both ways. I think that's realistic. There he comes. He's coming on back. Download. We see. There you go. There you go, Mark. Please continue.
My technology is chaos. It's not community. So we can go in both ways. But if we go the chaos direction, I think we could end up in a similar situation to countries like Hungary, and maybe even to a certain extent like Russia, where oligarchic autocracies end up ruling under the facade of a democracy. We call people with billions of dollars with too much political control that's unjust in other countries, we call them oligarchs. Here in the United States, we just call them billionaires. I think we have to realize that we have an oligarchy problem here in the United States as well. And if we let the oligarchs end up gaining autocratic control of our courts, of our government agencies, especially our regulatory agencies, and if they're able to perpetuate unjust election systems that further solidify this minority control over political and economic power, it's going to be really difficult to turn the tide in the other direction. So this isn't necessarily ending on a note of hope, but a note of warning, because it's unfortunate to note that it's much easier to move from being a democracy to becoming an autocracy than it is to go from being an autocracy back to a democracy. So we better have our last stand now. We better make sure that we don't go all the way to autocracy, because getting back to democracy would be extremely difficult. And if you look at other countries that have gone in that direction, they don't get back easily.
Mark, I'm glad you said that. And that's still not a negative note at all. It's a real note. It's so important for people who are viewing, watching, listening, to understand that the threat is real. This struggle is real. And it does require all of us to engage and do something. If everybody does something, nobody has to do it all. If everybody does a little, no one has to do a lot. And it does fundamentally start with voting. So I just want to express my appreciation to this panel for your wisdom, your insight, and more importantly, for your engagement, for your willingness to come out of your comfort zone. We could all be home watching TV, reading books, drinking a little adult beverage, or having fun and enjoying whatever it is we have. But you've decided to put it on the line and go to DC, go get arrested. I told Marianne I'm going with her for the next For People's campaign effort in June. Tamya to stand on the steps of the Supreme Court. Mark to all over the U.S. To speak to the moral and the ethical necessity of action. And Stephanie, for your work right here at home, empowering people to vote and making sure people understand how important their vote is. Thank you all for joining us. Now, everybody in the virtual world who's listening and watching, don't go anywhere. We're getting ready to call some names, but I also want to say very quickly that each of these organizations that are represented today have opportunities for people to engage. Of course, we do it Together Oklahoma and Oklahoma Policy. I have present opportunities for you to engage. We have what we're calling affinity groups, issue groups. So if you want to focus on healthcare, criminal justice, if you want to focus on family security, get the wages up, we offer an opportunity. You'll hear more about that. Those of you who sign on, put in the chat and somewhere, let us know, email us, or however you want to do to contact us and let us know you want to engage with us, because we need you, because the power is with the people. Things don't change unless people exercise the power that they have. So the Poor People's Campaign, the League of Women Voters, ACLU, Rank the Vote Oklahoma, all opportunities, along with, of course, Together Oklahoma and our affinity groups. We have a group of people who are engaged right in Lawton, Oklahoma right now. They took it upon themselves to not watch at home, but to come together, a small group collectively. I hear tell they're in the studio. So we want to bring, I see Lawton, Oklahoma. There are a few folks who got a little feedback going on.
That's my hometown.
Yay,
My
Lawton,
hometown.
Oklahoma. Let's wave. Thank you very much. So all across the state, we brought together people in small groups, Lawton, in Guthrie, Oklahoma, in Ardmore, in Sapulpa, in Claremore, and there are about 9 or 10 locations where there are people who've gathered together to begin this process of organizing. So we're over time just a little bit. So I just again want to say thank you, Jessica. The show is yours now. You want to throw a couple of winners' names up? I can't remember how. There's the first one. Malaka Cook, Eunice Kennedy, and Karen Cardenas, winners of $50 gift cards. Jessica will communicate. I don't know how this works behind the scenes, but we'll get information from you so we can contact you, so we can facilitate your gift card. To all of those out there in the virtual world who joined us this evening, thank you for your time, your energy, and your interest. Let me know. That's what Jessica says. Email us at info@togetheroklahoma.org. Those of you who have my own personal cell number, feel free to tag me, email me, touch base with me as well. We need you. This movement needs people. People have power, but that power unused means we do become a powerless people, and the threat is too great. So again, I'm looking forward to you over the next few weeks to working with all of you on the screen and all of you who I can't see. And any closing comments, panelists? I'll give you the floor to say any closing comments.
My only one is let's get to work.
Let's work. I think everybody believes and feels the same thing. It's time to go to work. Bless you all. Thank you for joining us this evening. Happy holidays, happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas. Enjoy the season. Be safe. And just, let me just say this. This is not Together Oklahoma, OK Policy, but do get vaccinated. Let's be safe and let's be healthy and let's be well. Love you all very much. Thank you and good night.